Have you ever paused, truly paused amidst the relentless pace of life, and wondered why it hurts so much? Why, even when external circumstances seem objectively right, when everything on the surface appears to be perfectly aligned, there persists this constant heavy weight in your chest, this pervasive, unsettling feeling that something somewhere is fundamentally out of place within the very fabric of your being. Maybe you feel you've tried everything in your power to alleviate this inner ache. Perhaps you've diligently practiced meditation, sought out well-meaning advice from friends, attempted to numb the discomfort through sheer willpower, skillfully ignoring the pain by projecting an outward facade of being perfectly okay. And yet, despite all your efforts, the suffering remains, doesn't it? Lingering like a persistent shadow that silently, faithfully follows your every step. Well, I am going to tell you something now, something that perhaps no one has ever possessed the raw courage or the necessary insight to articulate to you with this degree of unflinching clarity. Until this very moment, most of your enduring suffering does not originate from the external world. It doesn't stem primarily from difficult circumstances, challenging relationships, or societal pressures alone. It fundamentally comes from within. It arises precisely from what you desperately do not want to see within yourself, from the essential parts of your own being that you have unconsciously, perhaps even deliberately abandoned, denied, or repressed along the way. Carl Jung, one of the most influential and insightful figures in the history of psychology, profoundly stated, "What you do not bring to consciousness returns as fate." And that, in essence, is exactly what is happening to you right now, playing out in the recurring patterns of your life. Life, through its challenges, its pains, its seemingly random events, is relentlessly trying to show you something vital, something crucial for your growth and healing. But perhaps, like so many, you do not listen. You instinctively run away. You skillfully disguise the inner discomfort with a myriad of distractions, potential addictions, or perhaps a series of ultimately empty relationships. You tell yourself repeatedly, "It will pass," hoping time alone will heal the wound, but it doesn't, does it? It persists stubbornly, relentlessly, because this deep existential pain does not want to be ignored. It desperately wants to be understood. Let me be unequivocally clear. This video is not just another piece of superficial, cheap self-help content designed to offer fleeting comfort. I am not here to provide you with easily digestible, ready-made phrases or simplistic, magical solutions. My purpose here is far more ambitious, far more demanding. I am here to provoke you, to challenge you, to gently yet firmly encourage you to finally face what you hide, perhaps even from your own conscious awareness. Give me just a few minutes of your undivided time, just that, and I will endeavor to show you precisely why you suffer so persistently, and perhaps more importantly, how this pervasive suffering can potentially end, not through superficial tricks or temporary fixes, but through the transformative power of deep, courageous awareness. Maybe right now, as you listen to these words, you feel as though you are residing at the bottom of a deep, dark well. Perhaps you sense you are teetering precariously on the verge of a breakdown, masterfully smiling on the outside while silently screaming on the inside. Or maybe through years of adaptation, you have learned to simply function with the pain, accepting it numbly as an inescapable, inherent part of who you are. Whatever your specific circumstance may be, I have a hard truth to deliver, one that may initially sting but holds the key to liberation. Your suffering continues relentlessly only because you have not yet summoned the profound courage to look directly at its root. And Carl Jung dedicated his entire remarkable life to meticulously mapping this often dark, complex inner terrain, the intricate, hidden landscape of the human soul. He understood perhaps better than anyone that genuine illumination, true psychological light, can only be found by those individuals brave enough to consciously dive into their own inner darkness. So, if you find yourself willing even tentatively to embark on this challenging yet potentially life-altering exploration with me, I promise you one thing. By the end of this video, you will not be the same person who started it, because what you are about to discover here possesses the profound potential to completely change the way you understand yourself, the nature of your pain, and the very possibility of authentic freedom. Let's begin. Music shifts, becoming more direct, probing the source of pain. You likely operate under the deeply ingrained, often culturally reinforced belief that you are suffering primarily because of external factors, because of your demanding boss, your difficult partner, the stressful lack of money, the relentless social pressure to conform, the weight of expectations the world seems to constantly place upon your shoulders. And undoubtedly, all of these external pressures can and do weigh heavily upon us. But what you may still not have fully grasped, the crucial insight you absolutely need to understand now, if you genuinely seek liberation from persistent suffering, is that true suffering, the kind that feels paralyzing, the kind that aches deep within even in moments of external silence and solitude, fundamentally arises when you become profoundly disconnected from who you really are at your core. Carl Jung powerfully asserted that the greatest tragedy that can befall the human soul is to live out an entire existence that is fundamentally not one's own, and that tragically is precisely what so many of us often unknowingly are doing. From our earliest years, we are subtly yet powerfully taught to fit in, to prioritize being accepted, to adhere strictly, to establish standards of behavior, thought, and feeling. And gradually, often imperceptibly, piece by painful piece, we begin to drift away from our authentic selves. We learn to construct and inhabit a character designed primarily to please others, transforming ourselves into compliant puppets, meticulously careful not to disturb the status quo or cause discomfort. We systematically learn to silence our own genuine desires, repress inconvenient or unacceptable emotions, swallow our righteous anger, suffocate our natural sadness. And now as adults, we find ourselves carrying a deep, often nameless pain, a pain that doesn't necessarily scream loudly but rather consumes us, slowly from the inside out, manifesting as chronic anxiety, pervasive dissatisfaction, or a vague sense of meaninglessness. This is the unique, insidious suffering of those who live in a state of profound disconnect from their own true nature. The suffering of someone who gazes into the mirror and no longer recognizes the authentic individual staring back. You have become so accustomed, perhaps even unconsciously attached, to the role that was assigned to you, the mask you learned to wear, that you've forgotten the actor beneath. But the soul, that deeper essence of who you are, feels this discrepancy. It feels acutely when it is being forced to live a lie, and eventually it begins to scream for attention, often through the very symptoms you are struggling with. Persistent anxiety, unexplained insomnia, debilitating apathy, crippling guilt. Emotional pain, in this Jungian perspective, is fundamentally the soul's alarm system, desperately signaling that you are engaged in an ongoing act of self-betrayal. Make no mistake, it is rarely failure itself that hurts most profoundly. It is the crushing weight of the false expectation you constructed about who you mistakenly believed you should be. It is not inherent loneliness that truly wounds the soul. It is the terrifying emptiness that arises from not knowing who you genuinely are anymore when you find yourself inevitably alone. It is ultimately not the other person who possesses the power to inflict the deepest hurt. It is you every single time you unconsciously abandon yourself, your needs, your truth, your values, simply to maintain a superficial appearance or avoid potential conflict. And as long as this fundamental disconnect between your authentic self and the life you are living persists, the suffering will inevitably continue no matter how much you try to fix external circumstances, because you are desperately trying to heal an external wound, applying bandages to symptoms when the root of the problem lies deep within you. But here lies the absolutely central hopeful point. This persistent pain, however overwhelming it may feel, is fundamentally a warning, a signal, not a life sentence. Jung profoundly believed that suffering, when understood correctly, often serves as the crucial first step towards genuine psychological transformation. Pain exists paradoxically to push you back home, back towards your neglected, often forgotten true self. And this essential return journey begins precisely at the moment you consciously choose to stop running away from the discomfort and instead start courageously listening deeply to what has been long buried within your unconscious, listening attentively to what has been systematically silenced by fear or conditioning, listening compassionately to what has been conveniently forgotten or actively repressed. In the next vital part of our exploration, we will delve into arguably the most dangerous, yet simultaneously the most potentially liberating force within the entire human psyche. We will confront the very part of yourself that you likely fear the most, the aspect you've spent a lifetime trying to avoid or deny, but it is precisely within this hidden territory that the secret to your healing lies concealed. We will explore that which Jung famously termed the shadow. If you truly, genuinely desire to stop suffering, you absolutely need to know it, understand it, and ultimately learn how to courageously face it. Music shifts, becoming perhaps darker, more intense. Exploring the shadow, you desperately want to stop suffering, to find lasting peace. Yet you consistently find yourself fighting against the symptoms while perpetually avoiding the underlying cause. You battle the anxiety, suppress the guilt, manage the anger, numb the sadness. You treat all of these difficult emotions as if they were hostile enemies, character flaws that must be rigorously eliminated or controlled at all costs. But what you may not yet know, or perhaps consciously refuse to accept, is that the true enemy, the primary source of much of your persistent internal conflict, is often not located out there in the external world. It resides deep within, operating silently, hidden from your conscious view. And that which remains unseen, unacknowledged, is precisely where the real danger lies. Carl Jung gave this hidden, often disowned side of our personality a specific name: the shadow. And do not be fooled by the term. Everyone carries a shadow, including you, regardless of how good or well-adjusted you may appear on the surface. The shadow represents, in essence, everything you have systematically repressed, actively hidden, or consciously denied within yourself over the course of your lifetime. It is the repository of your unacceptable desires, your forbidden emotions, your contained, simmering anger, your often unacknowledged sexuality, your ambition perhaps disguised as false humility, your deep-seated fears that you desperately pretend not to possess. Crucially, the shadow is often formed by the very parts of yourself you did not want to be, or perhaps more accurately, the parts you learned you could not afford to be in order to survive or gain acceptance within your specific environment. But simply denying or repressing these aspects does not make them disappear. They are still there, very much alive, dwelling in the psychological dark, the realm of the unconscious. And then the more vehemently you ignore or deny the existence of your shadow, the more unconsciously it tends to dominate you, pulling the strings of your life from behind the scenes. Think honestly about the times you have inexplicably exploded in anger over something seemingly minor, or the times you have mysteriously sabotaged an incredible opportunity just as success seemed within reach. Or perhaps the times you abruptly ended a potentially healthy relationship based on an impulse you couldn't logically explain. That is often the shadow at work. It subtly infiltrates your thoughts, skillfully manipulates your emotions unconsciously, shapes your decisions, all often entirely without your conscious realization or consent. Jung's profound statement bears repeating: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Do you currently perceive your suffering as mere bad luck, inescapable karma, or some form of cosmic injustice? Consider the possibility that perhaps it is largely your own unacknowledged shadow controlling you from within, and rest assured it will keep doing so relentlessly until you finally summon the courage to turn around and face it head-on. The inherent problem, of course, is that consciously facing the shadow requires immense courage. It demands that you be willing to admit things about yourself, uncomfortable desires, hidden resentments, past mistakes that you would much rather not admit. It requires you to look unflinchingly into the psychological mirror and truly see the aspects of yourself you have always diligently tried to hide even from your own awareness. It necessitates that you stop playing the victim role perpetually, blaming external circumstances, and courageously accept that yes, there is potentially a monster, a repository of primitive instincts, repressed anger, hidden selfishness, residing inside you. But crucially, it also requires recognizing that this shadow aspect, however dark or uncomfortable, is also fundamentally human, an integral, undeniable part of you. But here lies the most important, potentially liberating point regarding the shadow. It is not inherently your enemy. It is more accurately the exiled, neglected, often wounded part of your own soul. And like any renegade, misunderstood part of a system, it ultimately just wants on some deep level to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, and ultimately to be integrated back into the conscious wholeness of your personality. Jung did not believe in the possibility or desirability of somehow getting rid of the shadow, of surgically excising the darkness from our psyche. Instead, he passionately advocated for the courageous work of consciously embracing it, understanding its origins and messages, and ultimately transforming its raw, often destructive energy into conscious strength, heightened awareness, and authentic personal power. Because as Jungian psychology teaches, what you perpetually reject within yourself ultimately weakens you, draining your energy in constant internal conflict. Conversely, what you consciously integrate, however challenging, ultimately sets you free. In the next crucial part of this journey, you will discover what you can actually do with this shadow now that you are beginning to recognize its presence and influence. We will talk about the path of courage, the essential beginning of real deep healing, and how to take the practical first step towards reclaiming your fragmented, often suffering soul, because simply knowing about the shadow is only the beginning. What you consciously choose to do with it is what ultimately changes everything. Music becomes more focused, perhaps with a sense of resolve and determination. You have journeyed this far. You have begun to confront the uncomfortable truth of your potential disconnection from your authentic self. You have perhaps even dared to look into the often intimidating eyes of your own personal shadow. And now arrives the most decisive, most critical moment in this entire process. The confrontation. It is simply not enough to intellectually understand the underlying psychological mechanisms behind your persistent suffering. Understanding is merely the essential beginning, the prerequisite map. True lasting healing requires action, courageous action, raw action, often undeniably painful action, because now you will need to consciously choose to do something that the vast majority of people never truly undertake. You must willingly cross the terrain of your own internal hell with your eyes wide open, with conscious awareness rather than fearful avoidance. Carl Jung was unequivocally clear on this point. The arduous yet ultimately rewarding journey towards the integrated self inevitably traverses a path that few possess the sustained courage to follow to its completion. And this necessary courage, let us be clear, is not the simplistic absence of fear. It is rather the conscious movement despite the fear, the willingness to proceed even when trembling. Consciously facing the unconscious means willingly walking through a dark, unfamiliar inner territory where your conscious ego controls very little. It requires deliberately letting go of the familiar mask, the comfortable persona you have worn for so long. It demands consciously dropping the victim role, relinquishing the tendency to blame external forces, and courageously accepting that there exists a part of you, your own shadow, that actively, albeit often unconsciously, contributes to your own suffering. This process demands brutal honesty. It requires that you definitively stop lying to yourself. Stop engaging in self-deception. Stop rationalizing destructive patterns. But what does it actually mean in practice to consciously face the unconscious? It means starting to truly listen to the often ignored wisdom your body screams when your conscious mind insists on ignoring the truth. That persistent stomach pain that arises whenever you are in the presence of that wrong person or situation. That constricting tightness in your chest that faithfully visits you whenever you passively accept yet another situation that diminishes your spirit or violates your boundaries. That inexplicable bone-deep fatigue that mysteriously appears every single time you force another fake smile or engage in inauthentic behavior. All of these physical sensations are often the unconscious, desperately trying to save you, trying to alert you to danger or misalignment, not trying to destroy you. You can begin this process with seemingly small, yet cumulatively powerful actions. Start writing down your dreams, treating them not as random noise, but as symbolic messages from your depths. Begin consciously observing your emotional triggers throughout the day. What specific events, people, or thoughts reliably throw you off balance? Actively reflect on the recurring patterns that have repeated themselves, perhaps for years, in your relationships, career, or inner life. Every single time something external significantly throws you off balance, emotionally recognize that there is likely a hidden message waiting to be deciphered. The unconscious primarily speaks in the rich, often ambiguous language of symbols, and your task now, should you choose to accept it, is to begin the patient work of deciphering these symbols. Not in a frantic hurry, not with harsh self-judgment, but with quiet presence, with genuine willingness to truly, deeply listen to yourself. Not merely to comfort yourself with easy answers, but rather to courageously confront the deeper truths. One of the most consistently powerful ways to engage in this confrontation is through the practice of deep, unfiltered writing. Set aside regular time, perhaps daily, to sit down and write as if you were confessing your absolute darkest secrets, your most hidden thoughts and feelings solely to yourself. Write what you feel ashamed to feel. Write what you are terrified to admit, even silently. Write what you have never ever dared to say out loud to another living soul. Because when those previously silenced words finally escape the internal prison of silence and are brought into the light of your own conscious awareness, they paradoxically begin to lose their destructive power over you. Another often indispensable tool on this journey is the therapeutic mirror. Seeking guidance and reflection, whether through work with a qualified psychologist or therapist trained in depth psychology, or perhaps with another trusted, skilled individual capable of helping you interpret the complex signals your own mind is constantly sending you. Jung profoundly believed that the unconscious is not merely a psychological garbage dump for unwanted experiences, but rather a living intelligence, a source of profound wisdom and healing potential. It genuinely wants to show you something vital. It wants to help you heal and become whole, but it demands that you approach it with openness, listening without filters, without defensive rationalizations, without excuses. Do you genuinely want to stop the cycle of suffering? Then you absolutely need to stop running from your own inner reality, because as long as you perpetually flee from your own depths, your suffering in various forms will relentlessly continue to chase you. But the moment you summon the courage to stop, turn around and look your pain, your shadow directly in the face, something profound begins to change. It starts to lose its overwhelming power. It begins to transform. And then often unexpectedly, you discover something truly remarkable, something no one likely ever told you. The very pain you fear so intensely, the suffering you have spent a lifetime trying to avoid, is in fact potentially a portal, a gateway to deeper understanding, greater resilience, and authentic transformation. And that paradoxical, transformative role of pain is exactly what we will explore in the next crucial part. What is the true purpose of pain in your life's journey? Why does it insist on appearing often unwelcome, even when everything on the surface seems to be under control? And most importantly, how can this perceived enemy actually become your most powerful, indispensable ally on the path towards genuine liberation? Are you ready to find out? Then continue with me. Most people understandably spend the vast majority of their lives actively trying to eliminate pain. They readily take medication to numb physical or emotional discomfort, desperately drown themselves in endless distractions, perhaps dive impulsively into shallow relationships, seeking temporary solace, perpetually chase immediate pleasures, meticulously accumulate external achievements, and curate happy social media posts, all in a relentless, often futile effort to avoid feeling anything difficult or unpleasant. But here lies a fundamental truth, one that our comfort-obsessed culture rarely wants to hear. As long as you primarily try to get rid of pain, it will paradoxically continue to chase you, often manifesting in more insidious or persistent forms. Why? Because psychological pain from a Jungian perspective is not here simply to be eliminated like a troublesome weed. It is here fundamentally to be heard. Carl Jung viewed suffering not as some unfortunate mistake in the design of life, not as a sign of personal failure, but rather as a profound, often necessary call to transformation. Pain in its various forms often serves as the psyche's primary signal, indicating that something essential is broken or out of balance inside you, something that desperately needs to be seen, consciously attended to, compassionately cared for, and ultimately realigned with your deeper truth. It is frequently the soul's desperate cry, communicating unequivocally, "This current way of being, this pattern, this relationship, this avoidance, this simply can't go on." Every form of psychological pain carries a message. Every persistent anguish holds a code waiting patiently to be deciphered. You simply need to consciously shift your perspective, to stop reflexively treating pain as an unwelcome enemy to be vanquished, and instead begin courageously treating it as a potentially invaluable guide. Think honestly about the times in your own life when life itself seemed to force you to change, to adapt, to grow. How many of those significant transformative shifts actually happen during periods of easy comfort and smooth sailing? Likely none. It is often precisely in the midst of chaos, during periods of intense struggle or breakdown, that the soul begins the necessary process of reorganizing itself. It is often directly in the experience of pain that the psyche urgently begs for reconstruction, for a fundamental shift in perspective or behavior. And that challenging juncture is precisely where true, deep, lasting transformation often begins. Jung asserted that suffering must often be experienced consciously, fully, perhaps even to its apparent end, and only then can it be genuinely overcome and integrated, not merely suppressed or avoided. In other words, the path through pain often involves traversing it with awareness, not perpetually attempting to avoid it. Let's bring this concept into concrete reality. Imagine someone who spends their entire life habitually negating their own needs and desires solely to please others. They are always available, always smiling agreeably, always saying yes, even when it depletes them. Gradually, inevitably, this individual begins to experience persistent anxiety, extreme fatigue, unexplained bouts of deep sadness. They might visit doctors, undergo numerous tests, perhaps even take anxiolytics or antidepressants, but often nothing fundamentally resolves the underlying issue. Why? Because their body, through these symptoms, is desperately speaking the truth that their conscious mind refuses to accept. Living in constant denial of one's own authentic truth hurts profoundly, and it will continue to hurt in various manifestations until they finally stop lying to themselves and begin honoring their own needs. Consider another common example: someone who finds themselves repeatedly trapped in the same destructive pattern in relationships. They consistently get involved with emotionally unavailable partners, perpetually feel rejected or inadequate, and always end up burdened by the familiar crushing feeling of not being enough. This recurring pain is not simply bad luck or a cruel twist of fate. It functions as a powerful psychological mirror. It is life persistently, repeatedly showing them that there exists an old, unhealed wound, perhaps stemming from unmet needs in childhood, perhaps related to past relationship trauma, that urgently needs to be addressed and healed. And as long as that core wound remains untouched, unacknowledged, the suffering, the repeating pattern will likely continue to serve as a painful yet potentially informative reminder. When you begin to consciously perceive pain not as a random affliction, but as a form of symbolic language, a communication from your deeper self, everything changes. What once seemed like meaningless punishment begins to reveal itself as a potential compass, pointing towards areas within yourself that require attention and healing. Pain, when approached with mindful awareness, begins to point the way forward on the path of growth. And then, as paradoxical as it may initially seem, you may come to realize that suffering, when listened to attentively with humility, presence, and genuine curiosity, can actually become the most powerful force for healing imaginable. Why? Because it forces you to stop the autopilot patterns, to look honestly within, to change what is no longer serving you. And this is precisely where personal responsibility enters the equation, because now you know. Ignoring your pain is fundamentally ignoring yourself. Running away from your pain is ultimately abandoning yourself. But if you possess the courage to turn towards it, to listen to it with humility, non-judgmental presence, and genuine curiosity about its message, it will eventually lead you towards a place of inner integration and resilience you may not currently even imagine exists, a place where peace resides. Not necessarily because the external world has suddenly become perfect, but because you finally have become psychologically whole. In the next crucial section, we will talk about this very place, the psychological landscape that lies on the other side of consciously traversed pain. What happens when you finally stop resisting your inner reality and begin the profound process of integrating everything you have previously rejected or denied within yourself? True healing, remember, is not merely the absence of pain. It is the conscious transformation of pain into awareness, wisdom, and strength. And that transformative potential is precisely what awaits you next. There inevitably comes a moment, often subtle rather than dramatic, after enduring so much internal confrontation, after courageously traversing the often dark valleys of your own psyche, when something fundamental changes. Not necessarily overnight, not accompanied by celestial fireworks or sudden dramatic revelations, but often subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a gentle breeze you barely notice, yet one that possesses the power to transform the entire climate of your soul. It is the profound moment when you consciously stop resisting your own inner reality, and perhaps for the very first time in your entire life, you begin to genuinely feel whole. But what does it truly mean in a deep psychological sense to become whole? It means courageously embracing everything you are, including, perhaps, especially the aspects you previously most detested or feared about yourself. It means consciously ceasing the perpetual internal war with your own difficult emotions. It means definitively stopping the exhausting attempt to be perfect, to live up to some impossible ideal. It means finally gratefully dropping the heavy masks you have worn for so long to protect yourself or gain acceptance. It's the transformative moment when you truly understand on a visceral level that your anger, your fear, your sadness, your shame, all those seemingly negative or unacceptable pieces of yourself you've spent a lifetime diligently trying to hide or eliminate, are in fact legitimate inherent parts of your human existence. And when you learn to consciously integrate them, to acknowledge their presence and understand their messages, instead of perpetually rejecting them, something truly miraculous begins to happen. the grip of pervasive chronic suffering begins to dissolve. Not necessarily because the external challenges disappear, but because your internal relationship to those challenges and to yourself has fundamentally shifted. Carl Jung termed this lifelong process of moving towards wholeness, individuation. It's crucial to understand this term not in the common sense of becoming merely special or different from others, but in the profound psychological sense of becoming authentically yourself, free from the distortions of unconscious complexes and societal conditioning, becoming a complete, real, authentic human being. And this hard-won authenticity arises not from inflated pride or egoic assertion, but from deep, compassionate acceptance of the totality of who you are. It's not ultimately about finding some pre-existing perfect self hidden away somewhere. It's about the ongoing process of discovering the multifaceted layers of your own being. And only those individuals who possess the profound courage to metaphorically enter the ruins of their own soul, acknowledging the brokenness, the wounds, the shadows, and patiently begin the work of rebuilding what has been fragmented or denied, can ever truly find themselves in this deep, integrated way. At this advanced stage of the journey, you begin to realize with liberating clarity that you no longer need to hide your pain or vulnerabilities, because you understand that your pain, while real, does not fundamentally define you. It was merely the necessary path, the challenging terrain you had to cross, not the ultimate destination. You look back upon your life perhaps with newfound compassion and begin to see that every crisis, every fall, every seemingly devastating emotional collapse served a profound, albeit often hidden purpose. Its purpose was to systematically strip you of the lie, the false self you had constructed, to forcibly compel you to abandon the illusion of control over life's inherent uncertainties, to relentlessly compel you to shed what was ultimately false, inauthentic, or limiting, so that you could finally authentically clothe yourself in your own truth. And this truth, let us be clear, is not always comfortable. It does not magically spare you from future vulnerability or pain, but it demands presence. It necessitates conscious choices, because now that you possess a deeper knowledge of your own shadow, now that you understand the potentially transformative role of pain, now that you feel the quiet yet immense power that comes from simply being who you authentically are, you simply can no longer live effectively on autopilot. You will begin to see with startling clarity who in your life genuinely uplifts and supports your authentic being, and who subtly drains your energy or reinforces old limiting patterns. You will find yourself naturally stopping the habit of passively accepting situations or treatments you once tolerated simply to avoid conflict or disapproval. You will begin saying no, not with aggression, but with quiet, firm conviction, free from the old burdens of guilt. And perhaps most importantly, you will finally wholeheartedly begin saying yes to yourself, to your own needs, your own values, your own authentic path. This profound internal change is often silent, almost invisible to the outside world initially, yet it is utterly overwhelming in its impact on your inner landscape. It's fundamentally not about striving to become some entirely new person, erasing your past. It's about definitively stopping the lifelong betrayal of the authentic individual. You have perhaps always been beneath the layers of conditioning and fear, and at this pivotal point of integration, you often discover something truly remarkable, something no self-help book likely ever taught you. You didn't actually need to somehow heal completely or become perfect in order to be fundamentally worthy of love and belonging. You simply needed to learn how to radically accept yourself in all your imperfect wholeness, to finally stop living in a state of perceived scarcity and inner lack. Because the deep, abiding peace you may have desperately sought in external achievements or relationships was in fact patiently waiting within you all along, obscured only by your own internal conflicts and resistance. But beware, this hard-won state of inner peace and integration presents its own subtle temptation. This is the point where many people understandably settle. The acute pain has largely passed. the most destructive patterns have noticeably changed. Life begins to flow with greater ease and authenticity. And then the powerful temptation arises to simply stop there, to rest comfortably on these newfound laurels. But Jung suggested there is often one more crucial step, a stage that he considered essential for the completion of the individuation process, moving beyond personal healing towards a broader engagement with life. Because individual healing from a Jungian perspective is not truly complete until it transforms into meaningful contribution, until the light discovered within begins to radiate outward. What do you do with your newfound light after courageously crossing your own inner darkness? How do you choose to live now that you are more awake, more conscious, more whole? This brings us to the final part of our exploration, the conscious choice to live differently, to move beyond mere survival and self-preoccupation, and to consciously exist with purpose, with heightened awareness, with a sense of profound responsibility for the unique gifts and insights you now possess. Because now that you have been metaphorically reborn through the fires of self-confrontation, life itself often demands more from you. Now you know. You can no longer pretend you don't understand the dynamics at play within your own psyche. You have heard every challenging word, perhaps felt certain truths pierce deep within you like a sudden clarifying blade, and yet you stayed. You persevered through this exploration. That simple fact already places you definitively among the few. Most people instinctively run when the truth begins to hurt. Most unconsciously choose to keep sleeping, preferring the comfortable numbness of unawareness. You didn't. You stayed. You listened. You engaged. And because of that courageous choice, you now stand at a critical juncture, facing a clear choice before you. Will you allow yourself to slip back, reverting to the familiar old patterns that inevitably drag you down into suffering, or will you definitively seize this moment, this newfound awareness, and finally consciously take control of your own existence? It ultimately doesn't matter how much you have suffered in the past. It doesn't matter what injustices or hurts were inflicted upon you. What truly profoundly matters now is what you consciously choose to do with all of this, with the pain, with the insights, with the awareness you now possess, because the very pain you have carried perhaps for years, potentially decades, possesses the remarkable alchemical potential to be transformed into profound strength. The gnawing emptiness you may have desperately tried to fill with everything and everyone external can, through conscious cultivation, become fertile silence, a source of inner peace and creativity. And the traumas that undoubtedly marked you, leaving their scars, do not have to remain a life sentence, an inescapable prison. They can instead become the very starting point for your greatest, most meaningful liberation. But understand something absolutely crucial. The heightened awareness you have hopefully begun to awaken here inevitably comes with a price. Because once you truly see, once the veil of illusion is lifted, you simply can no longer unsee. Ignorance, however blissful it may have seemed, is no longer a comfortable option available to you. You have been effectively called by your own soul, by life itself, to live at another level of consciousness, of responsibility, of authenticity. And living at this new, more conscious level inherently requires responsibility. It requires that you steadfastly no longer betray yourself for the sake of external approval or convenience, that you consciously accept nothing less in your life and relationships than what you genuinely deserve. Respect reciprocity, authenticity, that you do not hide any longer behind flimsy excuses or old familiar fears. You don't need to feel 100% ready or perfectly healed to begin living differently. No one ever truly is. What you fundamentally need is to decide to consciously choose every single day to live consciously, to look at yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your motivations, with unwavering firmness, yet also with profound compassion, and above all, with relentless truth. And most importantly, based on that awareness, to act. Because knowledge, however profound, without corresponding courageous action, risks becoming just another sophisticated form of self-deception. Carl Jung often emphasized that individuation, this profound process of becoming whole, is not a short-term project, but truly a journey for a lifetime. And perhaps today, perhaps through engaging with these challenging ideas, you have taken your first real conscious step on that vital journey. Perhaps for the very first time you have begun to truly understand that you are not fundamentally broken. You are simply in process, perpetually under construction. And the suffering you have endured was not merely a senseless punishment. It was perhaps a persistent calling, a desperate cry from your own soul urging you, pleading with you to finally come back home to yourself. Now tell me, what specific point in this video, what particular insight hit you the hardest? What truth resonated most deeply, perhaps shook you inside? Comment below. Write it down, not just for me, but as if it were a personal commitment to yourself. When you verbalize your insights, when you bring them into conscious expression, you begin to anchor them within your being. And who knows, your courageous sharing, your expressed experience might also inadvertently help someone else who is currently navigating this very same challenging terrain right now. And if this video has genuinely touched you, confronted you, awakened something within you, please don't stop here. The next video is just as important, perhaps even more so, as it continues and deepens what we have started here. I will see you there.